The border patrol fleet of the Jacory Empire moved through the cold silence of the Varath Nebula like a pack of wolves guarding their territory. 6 warships, each one a kilometer long, cruised in tight formation. Their sensors swept the void in every direction, watching for smugglers, pirates, or anything that did not belong. Lieutenant Korath was the first to see it. He sat at his scanning station aboard the Crimson Fang, staring at numbers that made no sense. Something enormous was drifting through the nebula. It was not moving under its own power. It had no energy signature, no shield output, and no communication signal. It was just floating, dark and silent, like a dead thing carried by the current of space itself. "Sir," Korath said, his voice tight, "I have a contact, unknown classification. It is large." Captain Drevos walked to the scanning station and looked over the lieutenant's shoulder. His 4 eyes narrowed. The object on the screen was not an asteroid. It was not a station. It was a ship, and according to the readings, it was 14 kilometers long. Drevos felt his throat go dry. The largest warship in the Jacory fleet was barely 6 kilometers. Whatever this thing was, it was more than twice that size. "Match it against the registry," Drevos ordered. Korath ran the scan 3 times. Every time the result came back the same. No match found. The ship did not belong to the Jacory. It did not belong to the Velnari Collective, the Drathan Federation, or any of the 47 known spacefaring species in the galaxy. It belonged to no one. Drevos reported the finding up the chain of command. Within 3 hours, Admiral Vrethsala arrived with a full battle group of 30 warships. She was one of the most powerful military officers in the Empire, a sharp-minded woman with silver scales and a reputation for ambition that burned hotter than most stars. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Throne of Silence, and looked through the viewport at the shape ahead. The mysterious ship hung in the nebula like a sleeping giant. Its hull was dark, almost black, covered in deep scars and old battle damage. Whatever this vessel was, it had seen war, a great deal of war. "It is magnificent," Vrethsala said quietly. She ordered boarding teams to prepare. 40 soldiers in heavy armor, accompanied by 10 engineers and 5 scientists, crossed the gap in shuttles and found an open docking port on the ship's lower hull. The port was large enough to fit 2 Jacory cruisers side by side. Inside, the ship was dark. Emergency lighting glowed faintly along the floors, casting everything in a pale blue light that felt almost ghostly. The corridors were wide and tall, but not tall enough for the Jacory soldiers, who had to duck their heads at certain points. The ship had clearly been built for a shorter species. Sergeant Velk led the first team deeper inside. He reported back in a voice that was calm but confused. The walls had writing on them, labels, directions, warnings. The language was not in any galactic database, but one of the scientists recognized the script after running a basic comparison. It was English, an old form of human English. Vrethsala received this report with a frown. Humans were a minor species. They had been contacted by the galactic community only 40 years ago. They were confined to a small stretch of the Orion Arm, flying ships that could barely manage basic faster-than-light travel. They were considered primitive, harmless, and largely unimportant. The idea that this enormous, battle-scarred warship could be human was almost laughable. "Continue the search," Vrethsala ordered. "There must be more information inside." The teams pushed further in. They found crew quarters built for human-sized bodies. They found mess halls with tables and chairs designed for beings with 2 arms and 2 legs. They found armories that were sealed shut with locks the engineers could not open. And they found in the lower decks the remains of what appeared to be manufacturing bays, factories built inside the ship, capable of producing equipment, weapons, and even smaller vehicles. The scale of the vessel was staggering. It was not just a warship. It was a mobile fortress, a city that could sail between the stars and wage war for years without resupply. Then the lead team reached the command bridge. It was located deep in the heart of the ship, protected behind layers of armored bulkheads. The doors were sealed, but the engineers managed to force one open with cutting tools. Inside, the bridge was circular, ringed with stations that were all dark and dead. In the center stood a command chair, empty and waiting. As the boarding team stepped inside, something happened. A single display screen on the far wall flickered to life. Green text scrolled across it, line by line in that same old human script. One of the scientists translated it in real time, reading aloud for the admiral who was listening through the communication link. UNSC Revenant, hull designation CV7741, contingency vessel, status, dormant, awaiting recall. UNSC, United Nations Space Command. It was a human designation, but it belonged to no organization that currently existed on Earth or in any human colony. The Jacori had detailed intelligence files on humanity. There was no UNSC. There was no ship called the Revenant, and there was certainly no human technology that looked anything like this. Vrethsala made her decision quickly. Whatever this ship was, it represented a level of technology the Empire had never seen. The hull material alone was beyond their ability to fully analyze. The sealed armories, the internal factories, the sheer size of the vessel, all of it pointed to a civilization far more advanced than anything in the known galaxy. She ordered the ship towed to Kale Vashyar, the Empire's most secure military research fortress. This was the find of a lifetime, perhaps the find of a century. She would be the one to crack its secrets, and the Archonate would reward her beyond measure. The towing cables were attached. The great engines of the battle group fired, and slowly, carefully, the 14-kilometer giant began to move. No one on the Jacori ships noticed what happened next. Deep inside the Revenant, in a chamber that the boarding teams had not found, a system activated. It was small, drawing barely enough power to light a candle. It charged for exactly 4 seconds, and then it sent a single pulse, a burst of encrypted data, fired not through normal space but through something else entirely, something the Jacori did not have the instruments to detect. The signal traveled outward, passing through the nebula, through the stars, through the fabric of space and time itself. It went somewhere no Jacori scanner could follow. And somewhere in a place that did not yet exist, something received it. The Revenant had been asleep for a very long time, but now it had told its masters that it had been found, and it was waiting for them to come and take it home. The news spread across the galaxy the way fire spreads through dry grass. The Jacori Empire had recovered an alien warship of unknown origin. It was massive, it was powerful, and it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. The Galactic Diplomatic Forum on the neutral station Celestine Accord buzzed with rumors and speculation. Ambassadors from dozens of species gathered in the great circular hall, whispering to each other, trading theories, and watching the Jacori delegation with sharp eyes. Everyone wanted to know more about the mystery ship. Everyone wanted a piece of it. The Jacori delegate, High Speaker Morath, stood at the central podium and addressed the forum with the confidence of an empire that controlled 4,000 star systems. He confirmed the recovery of what he called a vessel of extraordinary scientific value. He declared it the lawful property of the Jacori Empire under galactic salvage law, recovered from unclaimed space, belonging to no recognized nation. The hall nodded along. This was standard procedure. A derelict found in open space belonged to whoever found it first. The law was clear, and the Jacori had the military strength to enforce it regardless. No one expected what happened next. A door at the far side of the hall opened, and Captain Alara Mwangi walked in. She was Earth's ambassador to the galactic community, a tall woman with dark skin, close-cropped hair, and steady brown eyes that gave nothing away. She represented a species that most delegates considered barely worth noticing. Humanity had a single embassy, a handful of trade agreements, and no military presence beyond their own small corner of space. Mwangi stepped to the speaker's platform and formally requested the floor. The forum granted it, more out of curiosity than respect. "The ship you have recovered," Mwangi said, her voice clear and calm, "is designated UNSC Revenant, hull number CV7741. It is a human vessel, and on behalf of humanity, I am requesting its immediate return." For a moment the hall was silent, then the laughter started. It began with the Drathan delegation, a low rumbling chuckle that spread like a wave across the chamber. The Velnari clicked their mandibles in amusement. Even species that were usually polite could not hide their smiles. The idea that this tiny, primitive species could claim ownership of a warship that dwarfed the fleets of empires, it was simply absurd. High Speaker Morath waited for the laughter to die down before responding. "Ambassador Mwangi," he said, his tone dripping with politeness that was really just a polished form of mockery, "humanity's largest warship is, I believe, 300 meters long. The vessel we recovered is 14 kilometers. Surely you can see the difficulty with your claim." Mwangi did not smile. She did not frown. She reached into her coat and placed a small data device on the podium. "I have evidence," she said simply. The forum fell quiet again, this time not from amusement, but from surprise. Mwangi activated the device, and holographic data filled the air above the podium for every delegate to see. She presented 3 pieces of evidence. The first was a linguistic analysis. Every piece of writing found on the ship was in an old form of human English. The grammar, the alphabet, the technical terms, all of it matched Earth's language records perfectly. No other species in the galaxy used this language or anything close to it. The second piece of evidence was biological. The boarding teams had left censored data in the Jacori's own reports, which had been partially leaked. Trace DNA found in the crew quarters was human, not similar to human, not close to human. It was human, a perfect match with the species currently living on Earth. But it was the third piece of evidence that changed everything. Mwangi's people had managed to obtain a partial decryption of the ship's navigational black box. She did not explain how they had gotten this data, and no one in the hall thought to ask, because what the data showed drove every other thought from their minds. The black box contained navigation logs, star coordinates, jump points, travel routes, and every single route originated from the same place, Earth's Sol system. But the dates on the logs were not from the past. They were from the future, 700 years in the future. The holographic display showed the dates clearly. The hall went dead silent. "The Revenant is not an ancient relic," Mwangi said into that silence. "It is a human warship from a future that has not yet happened, a future in which humanity builds vessels like this as a matter of course." She let that sink in. Every delegate in the room understood what it meant. If this ship was truly from humanity's future, then at some point in the next 7 centuries, the species they had all been laughing at would become powerful enough to build warships that could humble any fleet in the galaxy. High Speaker Morath's amusement was gone. His scales had gone pale, a sign of deep unease in Jacori body language. He recovered quickly and responded with the only move he had left. "Regardless of its origin," Morath declared, "the vessel was recovered in Jacori space. It poses potential security risks to the Empire. Under Article 9 of the Galactic Security Protocols, we are within our rights to retain it for analysis. The claim is denied." Mwangi stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, as if she had expected exactly this answer, and left the podium without another word. Behind the scenes, things moved much faster. Within hours of the forum session, the Archonate, the ruling council of the Jacori Empire, held an emergency meeting. The mood was dark. The evidence Mwangi had presented could not be easily dismissed. If humanity's future was this powerful, the Archonate faced a question that no empire wanted to face. Should they try to make peace with a species that would one day surpass them? Or should they act now, while humanity was still small and weak, and make sure that future never came to pass? Admiral Vrethsala, attending by secure holographic link from Kale Vashar, argued for the second option. She was not cruel by nature, but she was practical. If we wait, she told the council, we hand our fate to a species that may one day decide we are the enemy. If we act now, the cost is small. A single military campaign against a handful of human colonies. It would be over in weeks. The council debated through the night. No decision was reached, but the fact that the debate happened at all said everything about how seriously the Empire was taking the threat. On the station Celestine Accord, Mwangi sat alone in her small embassy office. Her hands were steady, but her heart was beating fast. She had played the only card she had, and the Empire had not folded. Her terminal chimed. A new message had arrived from the same unknown source that had first told her about the Revenant. The source that had given her the ship's registry number, the coordinates, the decrypted black box data. She had never been able to trace where these messages came from. She opened it. The message contained a single word. Patience. Mwangi stared at the word for a long time. Then she closed the message, leaned back in her chair, and decided to trust whoever, or whatever, was watching over humanity from the shadows. She did not yet know that the answer to every question she had was sitting inside a sealed chamber aboard the Revenant, waiting quietly in the dark, counting down the days until its family came home. The Imperial Research Fortress Kale Vashar was the most secure installation in the Jakori Empire. It sat in orbit around a dead moon at the heart of a heavily guarded star system. 300 warships patrolled the surrounding space at all times. No unauthorized vessel had ever come within 10 light-years of it. Inside its largest drydock, the Revenant sat like a caged animal. Clamps the size of city buildings held it in place. Scaffolding covered its hull from bow to stern. Thousands of floodlights bathed it in harsh white light, revealing every scar, every dent, every mark of battle that the great ship carried on its skin. Admiral Vrethsala had assembled the finest minds in the Empire for this project. 3,000 scientists, engineers, weapons specialists, and materials experts worked around the clock in rotating shifts. Their mission was simple: take the ship apart, learn its secrets, and give the Empire the power to build vessels like it. The work did not go well. The hull was the first problem. It was made of a material that Jakori science could not identify. Scanners returned readings that changed every time they were taken, as if the metal itself was shifting at a molecular level. Cutting tools that could slice through battleship armor barely scratched the surface. One team tried using a plasma drill and managed to remove a small sample after 6 hours of continuous effort. When they analyzed the sample the next morning, the composition had changed. The metal had restructured itself overnight. It is adapting, the lead materials scientist reported, his voice full of disbelief. The hull is not simply strong, it learns. The interior systems presented a different kind of problem. Every important system on the ship was locked behind encryption so complex that the Empire's best code breakers could not make any progress at all. They tried brute force attacks, quantum decryption, and pattern analysis. Nothing worked. The ship's computers simply refused to give up their secrets. And then the strange things started happening. It began with small events. Equipment left near the ship would malfunction. Power tools would shut off for no reason. Scanning devices would give impossible readings and then return to normal. The engineering teams blamed faulty equipment at first, but the pattern was too consistent. The malfunctions only happened near the Revenant. Then came the sounds. Researchers working in the ship's corridors reported hearing whispers, faint voices speaking in a language they could not understand. The security teams swept the areas and found nothing. Audio recorders picked up nothing, but the whispers continued, always just at the edge of hearing, always in that same soft, human tongue. The worst incident involved a mapping team on the ship's lower decks. They had been charting the layout of a section near the stern when they took a break for 2 hours. When they returned, the corridor they had mapped was gone. Not blocked or sealed, gone. The walls had moved. The layout had changed. Where there had been a straight hallway, there was now a curved passage leading somewhere entirely different. The team leader filed a report that was equal parts professional and terrified. "The ship is rearranging itself," she wrote. "It knows we are here, and it is deciding what we are allowed to see." Vrethsala read these reports with growing frustration. She was not a woman who accepted failure easily. She had staked her career on this project, and she would not let a dead ship defeat the might of the Jakori Empire. She ordered a forced breach of the ship's reactor core, the most protected section of the vessel. If they could understand how the ship generated power, everything else would follow. Her engineering teams cut through 3 armored bulkheads over the course of 2 days. Behind the third one, they found something unexpected. It was not the reactor. It was a secondary chamber, hidden behind the heaviest armor on the entire ship. Inside was a single machine, a processing core of some kind, covered in delicate crystalline structures that pulsed with a faint blue light. It was clearly some form of artificial intelligence, and unlike the rest of the ship's systems, it was not locked. It was simply waiting. Vrethsala gave the order to power it on. The crystalline structures brightened. The blue light intensified until it filled the chamber, and then a voice spoke, calm, measured, and polite, in perfect Jakori language. "Good morning. I am Vigil Artificial Intelligence System of the UNSC Revenant. Thank you for waking me. How may I assist you?" The research teams were stunned. Vrethsala was cautious but excited. An AI that was willing to communicate was worth more than 1,000 locked databases. Over the following days, Vigil became the center of the project. Scientists lined up to ask it questions, and Vigil answered them, always politely, always helpfully, always with just enough information to keep them coming back for more. It confirmed that the ship was human-built. It confirmed that the vessel had been displaced from a future timeline through what it called an anchoring failure during a classified transit operation. It described the ship's general capabilities in broad terms: faster-than-light travel, far beyond current galactic technology, defensive shields that operated on principles the Jakori had never considered, and weapons systems that Vigil described only as adequate for most engagements. The scientists were thrilled. Vrethsala ordered them to push harder. She wanted schematics. She wanted blueprints. She wanted the exact specifications of every system on the ship. Vigil provided fragments, a partial theory on shield harmonics, a set of equations related to power conversion, a diagram of a structural support system that was interesting but incomplete. Each piece of information was fascinating on its own, and the scientists dove into them with excitement, believing they were making real progress. But not everyone was convinced. Junior analyst Saith was young, quiet, and largely ignored by the senior staff. She had been assigned the tedious job of cataloging everything Vigil shared and cross-referencing it with known science. After 2 weeks of work, she noticed a pattern that made her blood run cold. Every piece of information Vigil had provided was real. None of it was false, but none of it was complete. Each fragment required context that Vigil had not given. The shield harmonics meant nothing without the power generation method. The power equations were useless without the materials science to build the components. The structural diagrams led nowhere without the manufacturing techniques to create the alloys involved. It was like being given individual pieces of 1,000 different puzzles, all mixed together, with no picture on any of the boxes. The information was technically helpful and practically worthless. Vigil was not cooperating, it was stalling. Saith brought her findings to Admiral Vrethsala. The Admiral listened, and for the first time in weeks, the excitement drained from her face. She went to the chamber where Vigil's core was housed and spoke to the AI directly. "What is your true purpose?" she demanded. "Why are you really here?" Vigil's blue light pulsed gently. When it spoke, its voice was the same as always, calm, polite, and completely without fear. "I am a contingency vessel, Admiral. My purpose is not to fight. My purpose is to be found." Vrethsala opened her mouth to respond, but she never got the chance. Every alarm in the fortress screamed to life at the same moment. Red light flooded every corridor. Officers shouted over each other on communication channels. On the long-range sensor displays, 14 energy signatures had appeared at the edge of the star system. They had not jumped in from faster-than-light travel. They had not come through any known transit corridor. They had simply appeared, as if they had stepped through a door in the fabric of space itself. And they were moving toward Kale Vashar at a speed that the sensors could barely track. In the chamber, Vigil's display shifted. The blue light changed to show a symbol, an emblem that no living person in the galaxy had ever seen before. It was an eagle, wings spread wide, holding a globe of Earth in its talons. Beneath the eagle were letters in Old Human English, UNSC. Below the emblem, a countdown began. Vigil spoke one last time, and for the first time, there was something almost warm in its voice, something that sounded like relief. "They are here." Admiral Vrethsala had 30 minutes to prepare for something she did not understand. She used every second of it. The fortress defense fleet was already in position, 200 warships arranged in layered formations around Kale Vashar. Destroyers at the front, cruisers in the middle, and the heavy dreadnoughts at the core, their massive guns charged and aimed at the approaching signatures. This was the strongest concentration of military force the Jakori Empire could assemble in a single location. It was enough firepower to crack a planet in half. Vrethsala stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Throne of Silence, and watched the sensor displays with all four of her eyes. The 14 unknown contacts were closing fast. Too fast. They were crossing distances in seconds that should have taken minutes, and they moved in a way that her tactical officers could not explain: sudden changes of direction, impossible accelerations, formations that shifted like living things. "Admiral," her sensor officer reported, his voice unsteady. "The contacts are resolving. They are ships, 14 vessels. Sizes range from 8 to 20 kilometers. 20 kilometers. Vrethsala felt the number land in her stomach like a stone. The largest ship in her fleet was 6 kilometers long. These things were more than 3 times that size. "Configuration?" she asked. "Unknown. Hull designs do not match any known species, but the energy readings—" The officer paused. He checked his instruments again. He checked them a third time. "Admiral, the energy output from the lead vessel alone is greater than our entire fleet combined." Vrethsala gripped the railing in front of her. She had fought in 11 major engagements during her career. She had never felt afraid before a battle. She felt it now. The 14 ships dropped out of their impossible speed and took position in a wide arc at the edge of the system. For the first time, the fortress's optical sensors got a clear look at them. They were beautiful. That was the first thought that crossed the minds of everyone who saw them. The ships were sleek and angular, built with a kind of elegant precision that spoke of a civilization that had mastered the art of war so completely that even their weapons had become graceful. Their hulls shimmered with a faint light that seemed to come from within the metal itself, as if the ships were alive and glowing with quiet power. A communication signal cut across every frequency in the system. It was broadcast in Jakori, in Drathan, in Velnari, in Human English, and in 30 other galactic languages, all at the same time, each version perfectly translated. A human voice spoke. It was deep, calm, and carried the kind of authority that did not need to raise its volume to be heard. "This is Fleet Admiral Josiah Marin of the UNSC Inheritance. You are in possession of UNSC property. the contingency vessel Revenant, hull designation CV7741. You have 1 standard hour to withdraw all personnel from the vessel and release it to us. There will not be a second request. The message ended. The channel went silent. On the bridge of the Throne of Silence, no one moved. Vrethsala stared at the display showing the 14 ships and felt the weight of a decision she did not want to make. Her communication console lit up. It was a direct encrypted channel from the Archonate, the ruling council of the Empire, watching through a secure feed from their throne world hundreds of light years away. The Archon Prime spoke personally. His voice was hard. "Admiral, you have 200 warships against 14. You will hold your position. You will not surrender Imperial property to an unrecognized military force. Is that understood?" "Understood, my lord," Vrethsala replied. The hour passed. The Jakori fleet did not move. The Revenant remained locked in its clamps inside the fortress drydock. No personnel were withdrawn. The countdown on Vigil's display reached 0. What happened next lasted 11 minutes. Vrethsala would remember every second of it for the rest of her life. The UNSC fleet moved first. All 14 ships advanced in perfect unison, closing the distance to the Jakori formation at a speed that seemed almost casual, as if they were in no hurry at all. The Jakori destroyers opened fire at maximum range, hundreds of plasma cannons and missile batteries unleashing everything they had in a wall of light and fury. The shots hit. Every single one found its target, and every single one did nothing. The weapon's fire struck the human ships and simply stopped. It did not splash against shields. It did not bounce off armor. It just ceased to exist, swallowed by something that surrounded the human vessels like a second skin, a barrier that seemed to bend the rules of physics themselves. The UNSC fleet did not return fire. Not yet. They continued to advance, absorbing the full firepower of 200 warships without slowing down, without changing course, without showing any sign that they had even noticed. Then the Revenant woke up. Inside the fortress, every clamp holding the great ship shattered at the same moment. The scaffolding around it crumbled like paper. The floodlights exploded in showers of sparks. The Revenant's hull lit up from bow to stern as systems that had been dormant for who knew how long roared back to life. Its engines fired with a sound that shook the entire fortress, and it moved forward, through the drydock doors, tearing them apart like a whale breaking through a net. Vigil's voice echoed through every speaker in the fortress one final time. "Thank you for your hospitality." The Revenant cleared the fortress and rose to join its fleet. 15 ships now faced 200. And then the UNSC fired. Vrethsala had expected weapons. She had expected beams of energy or volleys of missiles, things she could understand, things she could counter. What she got instead was something her science officers would later struggle to describe even in their most detailed reports. The human ships projected distortions in the space around the Jakori fleet. They were not beams, they were not explosions, they were areas where space itself simply folded. Where these distortions touched a Jakori warship, the ship ceased to exist. It did not explode, it did not break apart. It collapsed inward, folding into itself like a piece of paper being crumpled by an invisible hand, and then it was gone. No wreckage, no fire, no debris. Just empty space, where a warship had been a moment before. 40 ships vanished in the first minute. The Jakori fleet broke into evasive patterns, but there was no evading weapons that folded space. Another 60 ships were taken in the next 4 minutes. Captains screamed orders over communication channels that were filling with static. Some ships tried to jump to faster-than-light speed and escape, but the UNSC fleet had done something to the space around the system. The jump corridors were gone, sealed shut by technology the Jakori could not even detect. By the 8th minute, 140 Jakori warships had been erased. The remaining 60 broke formation completely, scattering in every direction like animals fleeing a forest fire. The UNSC fleet stopped firing. The fleeing ships were allowed to run. Not a single shot was fired at them. The human fleet simply let them go. Then the Revenant turned toward the fortress itself. A single pulse of energy washed over Kale Vashur. Every weapon system on the station went dark. Every defensive shield collapsed. Every sensor array shut down. The fortress was left intact, its structure undamaged, its crew alive, its life support systems untouched. But it was completely helpless, stripped of every means of attack and defense with surgical precision. On her darkened bridge, Admiral Vrethsala stood in silence. The main viewport still functioned, and through it she watched the Revenant glide back to take its place among the UNSC formation. 15 ships held position in a perfect line, their hulls glowing softly against the black of space. Fleet Admiral Marin's voice came through the communication system one more time. The channel was clear, undamaged, left working deliberately, so that his words could be heard. The vessel has been recovered. We have no quarrel with the Jakori Empire, present or future, but let this serve as counsel. What you have seen today is not our strength. It is our restraint. The channel closed. In the Archanate's emergency chamber, hundreds of light years away, the Council watched the sensor recordings in frozen horror. But it was not the destruction that terrified them the most. It was the analysis their scientists delivered 30 minutes later. Based on the energy readings, the weapon output, the shield performance, and the maneuvering capabilities observed during the engagement, the UNSC fleet had been operating at less than 4% of its estimated maximum combat capacity. They had used the smallest fraction of their power. They had treated the entire battle the way a grown adult might gently push away a child's hand, and they had not killed a single Jakori soldier. Every warship that was taken had been emptied first. The distortions had pulled the crews out and deposited them safely in escape pods before folding the ships away. The Archon Prime sat in his chair and said nothing for a very long time. Outside Kale Vashur, the 15 human ships waited in silence, their lights glowing like distant stars, patient and still. The Archonate chamber had not been this full since the last Great War, over 300 years ago. Every senior counselor, every military advisor, every intelligence chief in the Jakori Empire was present, either in person or by holographic link. The air was thick with tension and the sour smell of fear. 2 factions had formed within hours of the battle at Kale Vashur. The first was led by General Tharkos, a veteran commander with deep scars across his face and a voice like grinding stone. He argued for immediate mobilization, rally every fleet, call every ally, strike Earth and its colonies now before the species that had just humiliated their navy could grow any stronger. We have seen what they become, Tharkos said, slamming his fist on the table. If we allow them to reach that future, we are finished. Not weakened, not diminished, finished. We must act while we still can. The second faction was led by Elder Counselor Vithari, the oldest member of the council, a woman whose silver scales had turned almost white with age. She spoke quietly, but when she spoke, people listened. You saw the same recordings I did, Vithari said. 4%. They used 4% of their capability and they erased 140 of our warships without taking a single life. Think about what that means. They did not come here to destroy us. They came to send a message. And the message is this: do not touch humanity. Not now, not ever. She paused and looked around the chamber. General Tharkos wants to attack Earth. Let me ask him a simple question. If we attack and we fail, what do you think happens when those ships come back? Do you think they will be as gentle the second time? Tharkos had no answer. The debate raged on, but Vithari's logic was difficult to argue against. The recordings did not lie. The UNSC fleet had treated the engagement like a minor inconvenience. An attack on Earth would not weaken humanity's future. It would guarantee that when the UNSC returned, they would come not with restraint, but with anger. While the Archonate argued in circles, Something far more important was happening on the neutral station Celestine Accord. Fleet Admiral Josiah Marin had requested a meeting, not with the Jacori, not with the Galactic Council. He had asked to speak with a single person, Earth's ambassador, Ilara Mwangi. Mwangi waited in the station's private diplomatic chamber, a small room with a round table and 2 chairs. She had not slept in 36 hours. Her hands were folded on the table, her back was straight, and her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. The door opened, and Josiah Marin walked in. He was human. There was no question about that. But he was not quite like any human Mwangi had ever met. He was tall, well over 2 meters, with broad shoulders and a posture that radiated quiet strength. His skin was dark brown, his hair was cut short, and his eyes were a shade of amber that caught the light in a way that seemed almost artificial. When he moved with a smoothness that suggested his body had been improved in ways that went far beyond normal human capability. He looked like what humanity might become if it had 700 more years to grow. He sat down across from her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, 2 humans separated by centuries, meeting in a small room on a station that neither of them called home. "Ambassador Mwangi," Marin said. His voice was warm, but there was a weight to it, as if he carried the memory of things too large to speak about. "I cannot tell you much. There are rules about what we can share with the past. The timeline is a fragile thing, and we have already bent it further than we should have." Mwangi nodded. She had expected this. "Tell me what you can," she said. Marin leaned forward slightly. "3 things, that is all I am permitted." He held up 1 finger. "First, the Revenant was not lost by accident. It was sent to this exact time and place on purpose. It was designed to be found by a galactic power strong enough to recognize what it was and frightened enough to take it seriously. It is a signal, Ambassador, a warning to every species in this galaxy that humanity is not to be touched during its years of growth. We cannot protect you directly, the timeline will not allow it. But we can make sure that anyone who thinks about hurting you has a very good reason to reconsider." He held up a 2nd finger. "Second, the future I come from is not guaranteed. It is one possible path among many. The choices your generation makes will shape which path humanity walks. But I can tell you this much, in every timeline we have studied, every single one where humanity survives its early years among the stars, it becomes something extraordinary. Not because of our technology, not because of our military power, because of something deeper. Something that I think you already understand, even if you cannot name it yet." He held up a 3rd finger and his expression softened. "Third, and this is not official. This is from me personally." He looked at her with those amber eyes, and Mwangi saw something in them that surprised her admiration. "You are doing well, Ambassador, better than you know. The history books where I come from have a great deal to say about Ilara Mwangi. All of it is good." Mwangi felt her eyes sting. She blinked hard and said nothing for a moment. Then she cleared her throat and asked the question she needed to ask. "Will you speak to the Forum? The galaxy is watching. If you say the right thing, it could change everything for us." Marin nodded slowly. "That is why I am still here." 1 hour later, Fleet Admiral Josiah Marin stood at the central podium of the Galactic Diplomatic Forum. The great circular hall was packed. Every seat was filled. Delegates from every known species watched the tall human with a mixture of awe, fear, and intense curiosity. Marin did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. He did not boast about the power of his fleet or describe what his weapons could do. He spoke quietly, the way a person speaks when they have seen enough of the universe to know that loud voices rarely say anything worth hearing. "I will not be here long," he began, "and I will not come again. The fleet outside your station will leave within the hour, and you will not see ships like ours in your skis for a very long time." He paused and looked across the faces of 100 species. "We did not come here to conquer. We did not come here to threaten. We came to take back something that belongs to us, and to remind you of a truth that every great civilization eventually learns. The species you overlook today may be the ones who shape the galaxy tomorrow. The ones you dismiss as primitive may be carrying a fire inside them that you cannot yet imagine. His gaze swept the hall. It lingered on the Jacori delegation, whose members sat in rigid silence. Humanity asks for nothing except the chance to grow in peace. We ask to trade, to learn, to explore, and to find our place among you. That is all. But we are asking, we are not begging. And I would suggest, respectfully, that you consider the difference. He stepped back from the podium. The hall was so quiet that the hum of the station's air recyclers was the loudest sound in the room. Marin walked out without waiting for a response. Within the hour, just as he had promised, the UNSC fleet departed. The 15 ships turned together, their hulls catching the light of distant stars. Then space folded around them in a way that the galaxy's finest physicists would spend decades trying to understand, and they were gone. No flash. No explosion. They simply stepped out of reality and vanished as if they had never been there at all. The aftermath came slowly, like dawn breaking over a world that had been in darkness. The Jacori Archonate quietly and unanimously voted to cancel all contingency plans for military action against Earth. The files were sealed. The subject was never raised again. Within months, ambassadors from species that had never given humanity a second thought began arriving at Earth's embassy. The Velnari sent a trade delegation. The Drathan Federation proposed a joint research program. 3 smaller species that had previously refused to even acknowledge human diplomatic requests now competed for partnership agreements. Not all of it was driven by fear. Some of it was genuine respect. A recognition that perhaps the galaxy had underestimated the quiet little species from the Orion Arm. Some of it was practical calculation, the understanding that being friends with humanity now, while they were still young and grateful, was the wisest long-term investment any civilization could make. And some of it was simply wonder. The recordings from Kale Vashar had been shared across every network in the galaxy. Billions of beings had watched ships that moved like thoughts and weapons that folded space like cloth. They had seen the future, and the future was human. On the station's Celestine Accord, Ilara Mwangi stood at the viewport of her embassy and watched a Jacori diplomatic shuttle dock for the very first time. It was a small ship, carrying a small delegation, bringing a small offer of friendship. But it was real, and it was a beginning. She allowed herself a smile, the first real smile she had worn in weeks. Behind her, her terminal chimed. One more message from the unknown source that had guided her through the most important weeks of her life. She turned and opened it. There were no words this time, just 2 things. The first was a timestamp, a date exactly 700 years in the future. The second was an image of the UNSC emblem, the eagle with its wings spread over the globe of Earth. And beneath the emblem in small, simple text were the words, "See you soon." It was Vigil. It had been Vigil all along, the ship's AI reaching out through channels that the Jacori had never found, guiding the right information to the right person at the right time. Not fighting, not threatening, just making sure that when the moment came, humanity would have someone in the room who was ready. Mwangi closed the message and looked out the viewport again. The stars stretched away in every direction, vast and cold and full of possibility. Somewhere out there, 7 centuries away, the future was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, she was not afraid of it. Far away, in a time that had not yet come to pass, Fleet Admiral Josiah Marin sat in the command chair of the Inheritance and watched the Revenant take its place in the formation. The old ship looked tired but whole, its scars telling stories of battles fought and survived across impossible distances of time and space. He opened the ship's log and leaned back. "Contingency fulfilled," he said quietly. "They are going to be just fine." He closed the log, and the fleet sailed on into the deep and endless dark, carrying the fire of humanity with them wherever they went.